My name is Margaret Holloway, and on the night my husband raised a crystal glass of wine to toast another woman, he never expected me to be there watching from the shadows, smiling as if I were nothing more than a ghost. That moment, his hand trembling, the mistress frowning at the wrong flowers on the table, the whispers spreading from diner to diner, was the crack of thunder before the storm. But storms don't begin in the sky. They begin in silence years earlier, when the ground beneath you is already unsteady, and you pretend it isn't. For years I lived in the picture frame life so many envied. Suburban home with blue shutters and a magnolia tree in the yard. Steady careers, community dinners, holiday cards lined neatly across the mantel. To outsiders, we were the kind of couple who still held hands at church, who traded smiles across potluck tables. No one saw the long evenings I spent alone, the excuses he rehearsed like worn-out prayers, or the distance that widened one unremarkable Tuesday at a time. I told myself what every loyal wife tells herself: it's just stress, it's just the job, it's just a phase. My husband Daniel was a financial consultant with a reputation for composure. He wore pressed suits and always had the right tie for the occasion. He looked dependable, reliable, solid. That was the surface. Beneath hairline fractures appeared late-night phone calls that ended when I walked into the room, shirts with faint traces of perfume, too floral for our laundry detergent, a sudden gym routine for a man who had mocked yoga for a decade. Still, I closed my eyes. After all, 17 years of marriage isn't something you burn to the ground over suspicion. Then came the day the illusion shattered. It was so ordinary, so banal, that it almost angers me when I think back. A Tuesday morning in February, cold enough to sting the skin as I fetched the mail from the front porch. Nestled among catalogs and bills was a crisp white envelope from a floral service we had never used. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting another advertisement. It wasn't. "Thank you for your order. 1 dozen long-stem roses, paired with Dom Perignon. Delivery scheduled for Friday, Lumiere Restaurant, Denver. Special instructions: present roses upon seating. Charge confirmed to Daniel Holloway." My first thought wasn't rage. It wasn't even grief. It was disbelief. I stood there, my hands trembling, the icy air numbing my fingers while my chest burned. Roses, champagne, Lumiere. We had once spoken of going there for our 15th anniversary, but the trip was postponed, then forgotten. Now suddenly he had remembered. Just not for me. Inside the house, the kettle screamed. I let it burn. I sank into a chair, the envelope still in my grip, as if the ink itself carried poison. Images flooded my mind. Daniel leaning across candlelight toward a younger woman, sliding roses across linen, watching her blush. I knew then that all the late nights and evasive glances weren't ghosts in my imagination. They were real. Flesh and perfume and laughter not meant for me. I didn't confront him that night. When he came home humming as if life were unbroken, I smiled, served dinner, asked about his day. Inside, though, I was calculating. Every glance, every pause in his speech, every too casual mention of working late Friday was catalogued. My heart pounded with an eerie calm. That was the first night I felt it, not the fury of a betrayed wife, but the icy clarity of a woman stepping out of denial. My silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. I poured myself a glass of wine after he fell asleep. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your skin. I stared at him in the dim light, the man I had shared a bed with for nearly 2 decades, and felt the distance like a canyon. How strange, I thought, that betrayal doesn't roar in your ears. It whispers. It seeps in slowly until one day it's everywhere. The envelope lay on the counter, proof that the life I thought I had was already gone. I traced the printed words with my fingertip. Roses, champagne, Lumiere. Each syllable a nail in the coffin of the marriage I had protected for too long. But somewhere beneath the hollow ache, another thought emerged, sharp as glass. If Daniel thought he could build his romantic fantasy in secret, then I would be the shadow seated at his table. He would not dine in peace. He would not drink his champagne without tasting bitterness. And the roses he promised his mistress, they would never arrive. That was the night the plan began. The next morning, I woke with the sour taste of last night's realization still clinging to me. Daniel's alarm went off at 6:30 sharp as always. He stretched, kissed my temple, and whispered, "Long day ahead, I'll be late tonight." The irony nearly made me choke. I forced a sleepy smile, let him shower, and listened to the water running as if it were washing away the last traces of my old life. When the door clicked shut behind him, the silence was louder than any argument. I padded barefoot into the kitchen where the floral receipt still sat on the counter. In daylight, the words glared back at me with brutal clarity. Lumière, rose, champagne. I whispered them aloud, testing the sound as if maybe the syllables would lose their sting if I owned them. They didn't. They sliced through me, clean and precise, leaving behind only a cold determination. I opened Daniel's laptop. I had never been the wife who snooped. 17 years of loyalty had built a fortress of trust that now seemed laughably naive. His password, still the same as our wedding date, fell under my fingers without hesitation. The inbox bloomed before me, a garden of lies hidden in plain sight. There it was, confirmation, emails, receipts, even a note to the maitre d' at Lumière. Please ensure the roses are presented at the start of the evening. A special touch for a very special lady. My throat tightened, rage prickling under my skin. A special lady. Not me. Not the woman who had ironed his shirts for conferences, held his hand at funerals, carried the mortgage through lean years. Someone else. A stranger who had stepped into my place without asking permission. Scrolling further, I found messages that stripped away any last hope of misinterpretation. Dinner reservations scattered across months, all neatly disguised as networking. A hotel booking 2 towns over billed to a company card. And her name, Elaine. Elaine. I whispered it, rolling it across my tongue like a bitter pill. She was a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm downtown. Blonde 30-something with a smile too eager in the photos attached to her work profile. I stared at her picture, memorizing every line of her face, every careless laugh frozen in pixels. I should have felt fury at her. I should have wanted to claw the smugness out of her smile. But instead, the fury curled inward. She hadn't sworn vows to me. Daniel had. She hadn't slipped a ring onto my hand in the rain 17 years ago. He had. And it was his face I would confront, not hers. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms into the table until they hurt. My mind spun with images of Friday night roses delivered with a flourish, champagne poured into crystal candlelight flickering against glass. He would lean in close to her, whispering words that once belonged to me. The thought made bile rise in my throat. And then, as if summoned from the depths of my grief, an idea surfaced. Roses. Roses were his chosen weapon, grand red and dripping with romance. If roses were the symbol of his betrayal, I would turn them into the symbol of his humiliation. I pictured Daisies, plain, unassuming, cheerful. Not the language of seduction, but of mockery. A bouquet that whispered, "Your passion is ordinary, your lies are cheap, your romance is laughable." The image steadied me. For the first time since reading that receipt, I felt my breathing slow. The plan wasn't complete, not yet, but the seed had been planted. The day passed in fragments. At the grocery store, the cashier asked if I wanted to add flowers to my purchase. I nearly laughed aloud. At work, my students noticed my distraction. One even asked if I was unwell. I waved them off with a smile that felt painted on. Inside, I was drafting, rehearsing, calculating. That evening, when Daniel came home, he carried himself with an ease that made me ache. He asked about my day, poured himself a whiskey, and settled into the armchair as if he hadn't scheduled a clandestine rendezvous with roses and champagne. I watched him from the doorway, every detail branded into my mind, the way his hand curled around the glass, the faint hum under his breath, the absence of guilt in his eyes. And yet, behind that calm exterior, I knew there had to be a flicker of anticipation, a heartbeat quickening at the thought of Friday. He was living two lives, the husband who kissed me goodnight, and the lover who rehearsed lies in the mirror. As I stood there unnoticed, I realized something chilling. He believed I would never see it. He believed I would never suspect, never step beyond the role of dutiful wife. That arrogance was his fatal flaw, and I intended to exploit it. Later, when he slept, I returned to the laptop. I studied every detail of the reservation, every instruction he had left for the staff. It was all there: the timing, the wine, the roses. His meticulousness became my blueprint. By midnight, my heart no longer throbbed with pain. It pulsed with a strange calm, like the stillness before a storm. Betrayal had stripped me of my illusions, but in their place, it had given me clarity. Daniel thought Friday night would belong to him and his mistress. He thought roses and champagne would pave the way to his perfect evening. But he was wrong. Friday night would belong to me. By Thursday morning, the grief had curdled into something sharper. The tears I had shed quietly into my pillow were gone, replaced by a composure that startled even me. My colleagues complimented me on my glow as I walked the halls of the university, but they didn't see the storm I carried in my chest. It wasn't beauty they saw, it was resolve. When I looked in the mirror that day, I didn't see the invisible wife anymore. I saw a strategist. A woman with 17 years of loyalty behind her, now repurposed into a weapon. If Daniel had built his affair on roses and champagne, then I would dismantle it with daisies and shadows. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I had always been organized, the kind of wife who balanced checkbooks and remembered every birthday. Now those skills became ammunition. I listed Daniel's instructions for Lumiere in neat bullet points, the handwriting steady even as my pulse raced. Reservation Friday, 7:30 p.m. Roses presented at arrival. Champagne d'homme Pérignon tableside pour. Special seating, corner window, candlelight. He had curated his fantasy like a stage play, every detail rehearsed. All I had to do was step into the role he didn't know I was playing. The florist was my first call. "Hello, I'm confirming an order on behalf of Daniel Holloway," I said, voice warm and professional. The clerk on the other end clicked through her system. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway. 12 long-stem roses to Lumiere restaurant, delivery scheduled for tomorrow evening." I smiled faintly. Mrs. Holloway. The name still belonged to me. "Actually, we've had a change of plans. Could you switch those roses to daisies instead?" "Yes, daisies. Wrapped in simple paper, no ribbon needed." "Oh, and please, leave the note blank." The woman hesitated. "Are you sure it's quite a shift?" "Positive," I said firmly. "Charge it to the same card. He'll know why." When I hung up, a wave of adrenaline washed over me. The first piece had clicked into place. Next was the wine. I called Lumiere directly, my tone crisp and rehearsed. "This is Margaret Holloway calling regarding a reservation under my husband's name, Daniel Holloway. I'd like to make a slight adjustment to the wine selection. The Dom Pérignon is unnecessary. Instead, please serve the house white. The less expensive option will be fine." The hostess, polite and unsuspecting, confirmed the change. "Of course, Mrs. Holloway. Shall I also update the notes?" "Yes," I said. "Please make sure the bouquet is presented right after seating. It's very important." Very important indeed. By the time I ended the call, my hands were steady. Daniel's illusion of grandeur had been dismantled in 2 phone calls. The roses that symbolized passion were now daisies, a mockery of romance. The champagne meant to impress would be replaced with something ordinary, unimpressive. His perfect evening was already unraveling before it began. But the plan didn't end there. If I wanted to haunt him like a ghost, I had to be present. Not in rage, not in confrontation, but as a quiet, unshakable presence he couldn't escape. I opened my wardrobe, flipping past dresses worn to faculty dinners and weddings. My hand paused on an ivory silk dress one Daniel had once dismissed as too pale, too washed out for you. I ran my fingers over the fabric. Pale, washed out, ghostly, perfect. I pictured myself walking into Lumiere in that dress, hair pinned back, face calm, every step deliberate. I wouldn't need to raise my voice. My silence would speak louder than screams ever could. That night, as Daniel showered, I sat on the bed and scrolled through Elaine's social media. Photos of her at brunches, smiling in offices, sipping cocktails with girlfriends. I imagined her face when the Daisies arrived, confusion spreading as Daniel tried to salvage the evening. I imagined the shift in her eyes when she realized the grand romance wasn't so grand after all. And then, beyond the humiliation, there was the reckoning. Not with her, but with him. I wanted Daniel to feel the weight of every lie. I wanted him to glance up from his table expecting a night of secrecy, and instead, meet my gaze across the room. Not fury, not tears. Just the calm stare of a woman who knew everything and had already chosen her exit. By midnight, the plan was etched into my mind like a script. Daisies instead of roses. House wine instead of champagne. Ivory dress pale as moonlight. Arrival 20 minutes early to secure a vantage point. Silence until the perfect moment. I tucked the notepad into my drawer and lay awake beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing. He had no idea that the stage he built for his mistress would become his own courtroom, that the woman he thought blind was already writing his downfall. I didn't toss or turn. I didn't weep. I simply waited, counting the hours until Friday, until the curtain would rise, and Daniel would see that the ghost he had tried to bury in routine and neglect was very much alive and seated at his table. Friday arrived with an odd stillness. The sky was clear, the kind of brittle winter blue that makes every shadow sharper, every sound louder. I moved through the day like a woman half asleep, teaching my classes, smiling at students grading papers. Beneath the routine, though, my chest thrummed with a steady beat, anticipation, not fear. By late afternoon, I stood before the mirror. The ivory dress slipped over my shoulders like water, clinging just enough to remind me of my own form, my own presence. I pinned my hair into a soft twist, let a few strands fall around my face. A trace of pale lipstick, subtle eyeliner, nothing dramatic. I didn't want to dazzle. I wanted to unsettle. The heels were champagne-colored, a pair I had never worn outside their box. Daniel once said they looked too bridal. Tonight that was exactly the point. A haunting. A reminder. As I fastened the straps, I whispered to my reflection, "You're not his wife tonight. You're his ghost." The drive downtown was a blur of traffic lights and shifting shadows. Lumiere's facade shimmered in the fading light, tall windows glowing gold against the evening sky. I parked 2 blocks away, preferring the walk, each step a rehearsal, each inhale, drawing in the cold air like armor. Inside the restaurant was hushed elegance. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, violins drifted softly from hidden speakers. The maitre d', a young man with perfect posture, greeted me. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" I smiled faintly. "Not tonight. But I'd like a table near the window, if possible close to the Holloway reservation." He nodded without suspicion, as if requests like mine came every day. Within minutes, I was seated at a table with a clear view of the corner where Daniel's perfect evening would unfold. I ordered a martini, the glass cold against my palm. My heartbeat slowed. I was in position. The minutes stretched, each second a taut string. Then at 7:28 they arrived. Daniel polished as always in a slate gray blazer I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago. Elaine on his arm, draped in crimson silk, her blonde hair curled into loose waves. She laughed at something he whispered, tilting her head in a way that might have once charmed me. They were led to the corner table, candlelight flickering over their faces. I tightened my grip on the stem of my glass, my nails pressing crescents into my skin. Not from jealousy, but from the sharp satisfaction of what I knew was coming. The waiter approached their table with a flourish. "A gift for the lady," he announced, presenting the bouquet. Elaine's smile faltered. Instead of the expected roses, she found herself staring at a cluster of daisies, cheerful and plain, wrapped in simple paper. Her brows knit together, confusion clouding her eyes. She looked at Daniel. He froze, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "There must be a mistake," he stammered, his voice low but urgent. The waiter, oblivious, set the bouquet down with a polite nod. "Compliments of Mr. Holloway, and the wine will follow shortly." Elaine forced a laugh, brittle and thin. "Daisies. That's unexpected." Daniel's cheeks flushed. He tried to cover it with charm, leaning in, whispering something I couldn't hear. But his eyes darted restless, as if searching for an explanation. Then came the wine. Not the chilled Dom Perignon he had so carefully arranged, but a modest house white. The waiter poured with equal ceremony, but the illusion had already fractured. Elaine's lips pressed into a line. Daniel adjusted his tie, his composure unraveling thread by thread. I sipped my martini, the liquid sliding cold and sharp down my throat. Watching them squirm was almost surreal, like observing actors fumble on stage after forgetting their lines. Their table had become a stage, and the audience diners nearby began to notice. A couple at the next table whispered, casting sidelong glances. A man at the bar smirked into his glass. The atmosphere shifted subtly, a current of curiosity and suspicion humming through the room. Daniel leaned forward, his hand brushing Elaine's wrist in a desperate attempt at recovery. "Don't worry about it," he murmured, lips tight. But she wasn't soothed. She glanced at the daisies again, her expression caught between embarrassment and anger. "You told me you'd planned everything," she hissed softly, her voice barely carrying. I set my martini down, my pulse steady now like a metronome. The humiliation had begun, the cracks widening, but the climax was still waiting, my entrance, my ghostly reveal. I rose slowly, adjusting the fall of my dress. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I walked toward the corner table. Heads turned. The restaurant, lulled by violins only moments before, seemed to hold its breath. Daniel didn't see me at first. He was too busy fumbling through excuses. His smile strained, his mistress skeptical. But when I reached the edge of their table and stopped, he finally looked up. The blood drained from his face, his wineglass tilted dangerously in his hand. "Good evening, Daniel," I said, my voice calm, smooth, carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear. Elaine turned, her eyes widening, lips parting in a gasp. She knew instantly who I was. I smiled faintly, tilting my head, the ghost he thought buried now standing before him. I couldn't resist stopping by. Such a special night. The restaurant was silent. Only the violins played on, soft and haunting. Daniel's name hung in the air like a bell tone that refused to fade. He set the glass down with a tiny clink that sounded louder than any crash. Elaine's fingers tightened around the stem of her own, the polish on her nails catching the candlelight like tiny warning flares. "Margaret," he said, finally, voice hoarse. What are you doing here?" I let the question sit. A slow moment. A breath. The violins sighed their patient melody. Enjoying the ambiance, I replied. "It's lovely, isn't it? The flowers, the wine." I let my eyes fall to the daisies, innocent faces turned up to the ceiling, then back to him. "Unexpected, though." Elaine swallowed. "You're his wife." Not a question. A diagnosis. I gave her a small nod. "Some people prefer to say widow," I murmured, but only in the emotional sense. I watched the words pass across their faces, the meaning sinking in. Around us, the restaurant performed its delicate attempt at invisibility, waiters slowing tables, quieting heads, angling in the artless tilt that passes for discretion. Daniel forced a smile that was mostly teeth. "Let's talk outside," he said, standing half an inch the napkin crumpling in his fist. There's no need to make a scene. Scenes, I said gently, are made long before an audience arrives. I looked at Elaine. Were the roses your idea or his? Her cheeks flared. He said. She glanced at Daniel, searching for the script he'd promised. It wasn't there. A waiter appeared like a nervous sparrow hovering at the edge of the table. Is everything all right? Perfect, I said pleasantly. We were just admiring the bouquet. I lifted a daisy from the paper and set it beside Elaine's plate. Its white petals seemed almost luminous in the candlelight. They stand for purity, I added softly. Or farewell, depending on the story you prefer. Daniel bristled. Margaret enough. I turned to him, and something in my face must have halted him. I didn't feel anger. I felt a surgical calm, a precision years in the making. Enough began months ago, I said. You just didn't hear it. For a heartbeat, everything was still: the music, the moth-soft sweep of conversation, even the flicker of the candle. Then Elaine cleared her throat, a brittle sound. We should go, she whispered. This is educational, I offered. You work in law? I teach. Perhaps we can meet in the middle and call it evidence. Her eyes flashed hurt and pride warring beneath mascara. I didn't know she'd be here, she said to Daniel like a child, appealing to a parent who could fix things. No, I said, he didn't plan for me. He planned for roses and champagne. I lifted my water glass and the crystal made a soft chime against my ring. But plans change. Across the room, the maitre d', the same one who had seated me, watched with a diplomat's concern. He approached with careful grace. Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Holloway, he said, his voice low. If you'd like privacy, we have a small salon in the back. I can make it ready for you. Daniel seized it like a rope. Yes, that. We'll take that. I raised a hand. In a moment. I turned to Elaine, studying her more closely now, the effort of her dress, the careful lipstick, the tremor in her hand she couldn't quite suppress. Her youth wasn't as young as I'd expected. There were fine lines by her eyes that spoke of long days and complicated hopes. Betrayal never arrives empty-handed. It brings its own small heartbreaks for everyone at the table. Elaine, I said, using her name for the first time. She flinched. I won't insult either of us by pretending this is an accident, but I will say something plainly because my husband is allergic to plain speech. I'm not here to claw your eyes out. I'm here to return what he gave you, the fantasy. It's broken. Her gaze slid to the daisies, then to Daniel, then back to me. I didn't ask for your marriage, she whispered. No, I said. You asked for a story where you're cherished. I know that story. I lived it. I also know the chapter where the adoring man decides he's entitled to applause from two stages at once. Daniel's jaw worked. You don't understand. I lifted my palm, the gesture small and merciless. Daniel, please don't use that sentence. It's worn thin. A ripple of quiet laughter, one table then another, spooled out, and then died embarrassed for itself. Daniel's face flushed a furious red. He looked like a man who had just realized his reflection was a stranger. Mrs. Holloway, the maitre d', tried again, more urgent now. Perhaps. I turned to him with gratitude. You've been gracious. We won't be long. Then to Daniel. We'll take your salon. I'll give you the dignity you didn't give me. He nodded stiffly, relief and dread braided together. He placed a hand at the small of Elaine's back, guiding her to stand. She flinched as if his touch burned. The daisies sat between them like a joke told in the wrong room. As we moved, the restaurant parted around us, eyes falling, then lifting forks, pausing in midair. The carpet hushed our steps. A corridor opened like a throat, dim and narrow, paintings of vineyards lining the walls. I walked a pace behind them, the whisper of my silk dress like distant rain. At the door to the salon, the maitre d' held the handle but didn't open it yet. Shall I send someone in with water, coffee? he asked, clinging to hospitality as though it could cushion the blow. Water will be fine, I said. And I glanced back toward the table we had left the daisies glowing faintly in their paper wrap. Bring the bouquet. He blinked, then recovered. Of course. He signaled, and a waiter hurried away. Daniel's voice came low, sharp. Why are you doing this? I met his eyes. Because you already did. I'm only letting the light in. He exhaled a ragged sound. You could have called. We could have talked. At home. At home, I repeated, tasting the words. Where you practice your lies like scales on a piano. No. Here is correct. You choreographed secrecy. I'm just reversing the lighting. Elaine stood very still, her arms crossed the crimson silk, suddenly too bright, too emphatic for the little room. I didn't know about the daisies, she said quietly, almost to herself. No, I said softly. But you knew about me? I let it sit like a stone in a stream, water curling around it. We'll keep this civil. Sit. The maitre d' opened the door, then revealing a room the size of a generous parlor, 4 chairs, a round table, soft lamps. The air smelled faintly of polish and citrus. I stepped inside first. The ivory dress swished at my ankles. I felt like a cool wind moving through a house that hadn't been aired in years. The bouquet arrived a moment later. The waiter placed it in the center of the table and fled, the door snicking shut behind him. I took the chair facing the door, the one with the widest view. Daniel and Elaine sat opposite, a pair of students called in, after cheating on an exam, their bravado gone. The daisies' faces watched us all impartially. Since you're fond of ceremonies, I said, folding my hands, let's mark the occasion properly. I lifted one daisy, twirled it between my fingers, and laid it on the table like a place card. For the lies. Another daisy. For the lunches you called meetings. Another. For the hotel 3 exits past the one you told me about. I set it down with delicate care. For the roses you thought would make it all feel holy. Daniel swallowed hard. Margaret. Not yet, I said, the 2 words soft as velvet and just as impenetrable. You'll speak soon. Outside the little room, the murmurs of the dining room faded to a distant tide. Time elongated, delicate, and exact. I watched their chests rise and fall, watched guilt settle in their postures like an old coat shrugged on again. My heart beat steadily, a metronome marking the end of an era. Now, I said, and my voice did not tremble, we tell the truth. The door latched with a discreet click, the room sealed, the stage reset. The daisies brightened under the lamplight, simple and unashamed, and the ghost of a wife took her seat at the head of the table. The silence in the salon was almost holy. Not the reverent kind, but the suffocating silence that descends when every mask has already slipped and there is nothing left to hide behind. The daisies sat in the center of the table, their petals luminous in the lamplight, the bouquet a mock funeral arrangement for the fantasy Daniel had crafted. He cleared his throat first because Daniel always had to be the one to speak. Margaret, he began, his voice uneven. This isn't what it looks like. I almost laughed. 17 years, and that was the best opening he could muster. Then perhaps you should explain what it is, I said, my tone level. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like betrayal. With wine. And daisies. Elaine shifted, folding her hands tightly in her lap. She was trembling, though she tried to hold her chin high. I didn't want this to happen, she whispered. You didn't? I asked, tilting my head. Because it seems to me you wanted the roses, the champagne, the secrecy. Her eyes flickered toward Daniel, then back to me. I thought he was unhappy. He was, I said plainly. But unhappiness doesn't justify deceit. It demands honesty. That's what neither of you had the courage to practice. Daniel's hand flattened on the table as though pressing down on invisible papers. Margaret, please, I know how this looks. But you've got to believe. I don't have to believe anything anymore. I cut in, my voice soft but sharp enough to still him. I believed for 17 years. I believed when you said late nights were deadlines. I believed when you said perfume on your collar was a client's. I believed when you said you were tired, distracted, overworked. My belief built this marriage, and your lies burned it down. He sank back, his shoulders slumping. His eyes glistened, though, whether from shame or self-pity I couldn't tell. Elaine shifted uncomfortably. Maybe I should go, she murmured. No, I said, pinning her with my gaze. You're part of this too. You don't get to walk out before the lights come up. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Only the faint hum of the restaurant outside, muffled by the thick walls, reached us. The air was heavy with the weight of every unspoken truth. Finally, I lifted another daisy and laid it carefully on the table. This one, I said, is for the dinner in Boulder last September. The one you said was a conference. Another daisy? This is for the hotel in Aspen. 2 nights. I saw the receipts. Another. For every text you hid by flipping your phone face down. I leaned back. I could lay down a field of them, Daniel. An entire meadow. His face crumpled. Margaret, stop, please. I made mistakes. Stop calling them mistakes. I snapped, my composure cracking just enough to let the steel through. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning toast. What you did was a series of choices. Every reservation, every lie, every rose was a decision. Don't diminish them by calling them mistakes. Elaine's lips trembled. I didn't think it would last this long, she whispered. I almost pitied her then. Almost. That's the problem with affairs, I said evenly. They're built on stolen time. They're exciting because they're temporary. But eventually the clock strikes and the fantasy turns to dust. Tonight, you got your dust. Daniel buried his face in his hands. His voice cracked through his fingers. I don't want to lose you. You already did, I said quietly. The words hung there, final and immovable. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a strange clarity like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I rose, smoothing the silk of my dress. I'll be leaving now. Daniel's head shot up. No, please. Margaret. I placed the daisies back in the bouquet and pushed it gently toward him. You wanted roses to declare your love. You got daisies to mark its funeral. Keep them. Elaine looked down at the flowers as though they might burn her. At the door, I paused and looked back once. You think this night will fade, I told him. But it won't. You'll see daisies everywhere, at grocery stores, in gardens, in little girls' hair, and every time you'll remember. You'll remember that I was there, that I saw you, that your ghost of a wife sat across from you and ended the story you tried to rewrite. I opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The maitre d' was waiting discreetly a few paces away. He inclined his head, wordless understanding in his eyes. I nodded, walking past him with quiet dignity. Behind me, the salon door closed with a muted thud. It sounded less like an ending and more like a seal. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The illusions had shattered. Cold air folded around me as I stepped out of Lumiere, clean and merciless. The city had that winter shine Denver wears after dark, glassy streets, stoplights blinking like patient metronomes, a sky so clear it looked scrubbed. I walked the 2 blocks to my car, heels whispering, silk cooling against my legs. When I reached the driver's door, I didn't cry. Instead, I set my palm on the roof, closed my eyes, and breathed as if I could exhale 17 years of holding my breath. At home, I moved like a visitor in a museum of my marriage. The framed vacation photos, the wedding china that had only ever seen holidays, his blazer hanging on the chair like a man pretending he'd be right back. I went to the guest room and pulled down a suitcase. Into it went the essentials: 2 blouses, a sweater, my favorite mug, the book I'd been rereading because it felt safer than starting something new. When my phone vibrated, I let it. Then I turned it face down and zipped the suitcase shut with a sound that was almost a sentence. In the morning, I sent 2 emails before coffee. One to a friend who knew how to sit with silence, the other to a divorce attorney whose website made no promises but spoke of clean exits and clear paperwork. Then I showered and went to campus because the world does not stop for broken hearts. It turned steady as ever. My students were taking midterms. I walked the aisles and watched them wrestle their way toward answers, pencils scratching brows furrowed. They reminded me that most problems are solvable when you face them on paper. Between sections, I sat in my office and returned the attorney's call. She had a warm, frank voice. "We'll proceed quietly," she said. "No fireworks, no public war. Dignity is a strategy too." I told her that was the only strategy I had left. The paperwork began a choreography of signatures and disclosures. It was oddly comforting the way ink could stand in for grief, the way each notarized stamp steadied something inside me. Daniel tried to call. I sent him to voicemail. His texts bloomed like weeds. "We need to talk. I'm sorry. This can't be how we end." I let the phone buzz until it fell silent. When words arrive late, they are just noise. I rented a small apartment near the university third-floor walk-up with a stubborn radiator and a balcony barely wide enough for a chair. The first night there, I ate takeout on the floor and listened to the pipes knock like a distant drummer. The room smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. I slept with the windows cracked and woke to the particular quiet of a place that doesn't yet know your name. On Saturday, I went to the farmer's market and bought a mason jar of daisies. Their faces were simple, unashamed. I set them on the narrow kitchen counter where the morning light fell in an oblong patch, and I said, "You and me then." It felt foolish. It felt perfect. Living alone was a series of small ceremonials, learning the temperament of the cranky stove, tightening the screw on a wobbly cabinet, discovering that the grocery store on 11th discounts bread after 7 p.m. I assembled a bookshelf with the patient fury of a woman who has been underestimated. When it wobbled, I balanced it against the wall and promised it a second try. The university held a faculty luncheon 2 weeks later, a ritual of chicken salad and cautious gossip. The room buzzed with the hum of people who know each other's grants and divorces from a distance. I wore a navy dress and a thin gold chain and walked in as if I'd never been a ghost. Later during Q&A at a student ethics seminar, someone asked about integrity, the kind that costs you something. I said it out loud. Integrity is expensive on the day you pay it and priceless the day after. A few heads lifted. Mine did too. One evening in March, an email from Elaine slid into my inbox with the subject line, "I'm sorry." It was short, almost painfully so. "I didn't think about you because it was easier not to. I see that now. I've ended it. I hope you find peace." I stared at the screen. Not angry, not kind, just human. I wrote back, "I hope you learn to ask better questions of the men who ask for your discretion. Peace isn't found. It's made." I didn't sign it with warmth or with ice. I signed my name and pressed send and felt nothing else needed adding. Spring came on like a rumor and then suddenly, like a fact. I joined a community garden 3 blocks from the apartment. The first day the soil was cold and stubborn. The second it gave under my palms. By the third it remembered what to do. I planted herbs I could trust, and flowers that didn't apologize for being ordinary, marigold zinnias, and a little row of daisies like a line of small suns. I went home with dirt beneath my nails and slept like a child. Sometimes Daniel appeared in places where life used to pretend we were fine. The grocery store, the gym, the church I still visited on quiet Tuesdays, when the sanctuary was empty and spoke only in echoes. He looked thinner. The first time he stopped at the end of the aisle and lifted a hand that never quite became a wave. I nodded a small, unhistoric courtesy and moved on. My absence was the only sermon left to preach. The divorce finalized in early summer, signed across a sleek conference table that smelled faintly of lemon polish and small endings. I handed over my pen and felt a lightness that wasn't joy and wasn't relief exactly. It was an absence of weight. The attorney squeezed my shoulder. "Onward," she said. It was the best benediction. A week later, I made a reservation at Lumiere for one. The hostess didn't recognize me, or if she did, she wore professionalism like armor. My table was by the window. I ordered the house white on purpose and asked on a whim that felt like a decision for Daisies. When they arrived in their simple paper, I smiled and said, "Just like that." The violins did their quiet work. The city beyond the glass glittered like a brand new coin. I lifted my glass toward the empty chair across from me, not in bitterness, but in honor of the woman who had sat ghost still and told the truth. On my balcony late that night, the air was soft with heat. Somewhere down the block, an old radio poured out a Miles Davis tune like a memory loosening its grip. I watered the plants and watched city lights drift into constellations of their own making. I thought of the women who had written to me after the luncheon, students and colleagues, and a neighbor who'd slipped a note under my door. "You were seen." I thought of the women who would never say it out loud. I thought of daisies, how they thrive in regular soil, how they don't need permission to bloom. I am not his ghost anymore. I am the woman who walked herself home. The one who learned that love without honesty isn't love, it's theater. The one who can sit alone at a table and order exactly what she wants and pay for it with her own card and sleep in her own bed and wake without listening for a lie. If you've been listening, if some part of this found the hidden room inside you, take a breath with me now. You don't have to shatter your life tonight. You only have to turn on the light. Ask the hard question. Write the true email. Put a jar of daisies where the morning hits. When you're ready, step into your own doorway and say your name, the way I say, mine now. Clear, steady answered. If this story helped you see something more clearly, your worth, your boundary, your next brave step, share it with someone who needs the light. Leave your thoughts, so another woman knows she isn't alone. And if you want to keep walking with me through these rooms where truth lives, subscribe and stay. There's room at the table.